Welcome to chaomix. This is the Valve Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is half console, half computer. Oh yeah, and it's handheld. It's kind of the greatest thing ever. I got mine super recently and I'm absolutely in love with it. Seriously guys, it feels like this thing can almost play anything, especially when it comes to Sonic the Hedgehog games. Obviously, it can play anything on PC. So in theory, all of the Sonic games in your Steam library should be able to be played on it with relative ease. But the Steam Deck is also an emulation beast. It can feasibly emulate all the way up until the PS3 and Xbox 360, which is insane to think about when you remember that this is a handheld device. With the possibilities so endless, and with me being the deranged Sonic fan that I am, I began to think, I wonder how many Sonic games I can jam into this thing. So I decided to test just that, and then make a video about it so I can use my Steam Deck as a tax write-off. Anyways, we have a ton of Sonic games to squeeze in here, and I'm serious, we're gonna try to get all of them, maybe even some games you didn't even know existed. So let's push the Steam Deck to its absolute limits and try to fit as many Sonic games as we can. This video is made possible by today's sponsor, Yahaha Studio. Have you ever wanted to try your hand at making your very own video game? I know I have, and boy, let me tell ya, learning to create a game in a more traditional way can be really tricky. I mean, learning how to code is hard enough as it is, and combining that with other things like 3D modeling? That's a lot of stuff you'll need to study up on before even getting to the part where you actually make your game. But Yahaha aims to make creating games more simple and intuitive. Yahaha Studio is a new platform for 3D multiplayer user-generated games and content. Go to the asset library and use things like templates, components, and smart assets to begin creating your vision. For example, we can go to the Create section and choose the Hide and Seek template. We can then grab a 3D model from the asset library and bring it into our scene. And if we click on it, we can actually see the gameplay setup menu, and we can add components that we've downloaded off of the asset library. So let's attach the Behavior Player Transform component onto it. We can then press play, run over to our 3D model that we added, and there we go. We were able to transform into it just like that. Man, I love me some good old-fashioned prop hunt. Making fun games is made incredibly simple using Yahaha Studio. Use the link in my description to download and try out the free early access for yourself. And I'd love to test out your creation, so if you make anything, link it over to me and I'll give you some feedback. Huge thank you to Yahaha Studio for making videos like this possible, and with all that being said, let's continue with today's episode. So how many Sonic games can the Steam Deck play? Well, I'm gonna go through all the ones I got working, but if you wanna try your hand at getting any of these games to work on your own Steam Deck, there's actually a great guide out there that'll help you with any of the ones that aren't super straightforward. Big shout out to William for making it. I'm gonna be linking that in the description if you wanna check it out for yourself. It's worth noting that the Steam Deck has a game verification ranking telling you how compatible a game is at a glance. But this can't always be trusted. For example, Sonic Adventure DX says it's unsupported, but it actually runs flawlessly. Definitely keep these verification rankings in mind, but I think it's always worth it to test these games for yourself just to make sure. Or at the very least, Google can also be your friend in this situation. With all that out of the way, let's start with the games that you can find on Steam, since you should be able to play most of these no problem right out of the box. Both adventure games run great, and you're even able to activate mods with a bit of tinkering. I'd really recommend this for at least Sonic Adventure DX so you can get better SADX and enable widescreen and a ton of other quality of life changes. Lost World, Mania, Forces, and Origins all worked great as well. Generations was a bit choppy out of the box, but with a mod that upgrades the game from Direct3D 9 to Direct3D 11, you can get it to run practically perfectly. Sonic 4 Episode 2 runs great, but the same can't be said about its predecessor. Episode 1 will fail to launch unless you replace the exe file with a modified version that bypasses the Java requirements. But once you do that, the game runs perfectly. The 3 Sonic racing games, both All-Star Racing games as well as Team Sonic Racing, all run pretty dang good. But I'd say that Team Sonic Racing is the most optimized despite being the newest and most graphically intense. Yeah, it's kinda weird, but they're all more than playable though. And for good measure, I also tested out the Sonic games on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis Classics. With this you can play Sonic 1, 2, 3 and Knuckles, Spinball, 3D Blast, and even Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Yes, 1, 2, and 3 and Knuckles are all delisted now, but it's worth bringing up because if you have them and want to try playing them, you're gonna get a black screen when trying to play them in full screen mode until you force Proton Experimental in the Steam compatibility settings. But once you do that, everything runs great. Another game you'll need to force Proton Experimental on is Sonic CD. Once you do though, it runs exactly as it should. And that's everything on Steam. But there's a few other Sonic games for PC that aren't on Steam that I'd still like to try getting on here. The first one, Sonic Colors Ultimate. At the time of making this video, this game is only available on the Epic Games Store. There are plans to bring this over to Steam eventually, and hopefully when they do, it runs better. So to get this to work, I had to download the Heroic Games Launcher on the Steam Deck's desktop mode, the app image version off of their GitHub specifically, as the Flatpak version would not launch Sonic Colors Ultimate correctly. I also had to enable both eSync and F-Sync in the Heroic Games Launcher's settings, because this game is very choppy on the Steam Deck. It's maybe playable, but I guess that depends on your standards. I personally wouldn't want to go through this game in this state, but hey, more power to you if you do. Alright, we could stop there, but because I'm actually insane, we're gonna keep going with some of the deeper cut games. First, I'm gonna need a way to play Sonic Speed Simulator because I'm straight up addicted. If we go to the Steam desktop mode and use Discover to install a Flatpak called Grape Juice, we can then use that to install a version of Roblox more optimized for Linux. And just like that, we were able to play Sonic Speed Simulator on an actual handheld gaming device. Alright, the kids had their fun already. Now, it's real men's turn. Sonic Schoolhouse on the Valve Steam Deck.
I'm Sonic. Click on me for help. Hi there, I'm Sonic the Hedgehog.
This one took a lot of tinkering to get working, but the solution actually turned out to be pretty easy, and it's all documented on the guide linked in the description. If you own a Steam Deck and don't have Sonic Schoolhouse, please just don't talk to me. But yeah, that's all the games on PC that I chose to get. Of course, there are other Sonic games on PC that we could get if we wanted, but for most of those other ones, emulation is going to be our best and easiest option. So with all that being said, let's move on to everything we're able to emulate on the Steam Deck. Emulation is going to be the solution to the majority of Sonic games on the Steam Deck. I'd recommend installing something called EmuDeck in Steam's desktop mode, as it'll set you up with a ton of emulators with optimized configurations for our device. So let's start with the system that birthed the Blue Rat himself, the Sega Genesis. We'll be emulating the Genesis using RetroArch, which is a hub for a ton of retro emulators. And you'll probably notice that we end up using RetroArch a lot during this entire process. Now, I understand that there's gonna be some redundancy here as we have most of the classics in Sonic Origins, and also if you were able to get them before they got delisted, the games on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis classics. But there might be reasons why you'd rather emulate them here instead. But in short, every game on the Genesis is going to run no problem. All the stuff we got working earlier on Steam, but what Steam doesn't have are some of the more obscure Sonic games for the Genesis and Genesis add-ons. Using RetroArch, we can emulate not only the Genesis, but also the Sega CD, the Sega 32X, and even the Sega Pico. So obviously, we'll be able to play Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix. But we can also play total bangers like Wacky World's Creativity Studio for the Sega Genesis. Yes, this is a real Sonic game. And also Sonic the Hedgehog's Game World and Tails and the Music Maker for the Sega Pico. I even got the unreleased Sonic Eraser working for the Genesis. Yeah, we're doing games that never even released. That's how deep we're going with this. Now this next set of games I'm really proud of because they took a bit of elbow grease to get working, and I got them all to play the way Yuji Naka intended. You'll see what I mean very shortly. But I managed to get all of the old Sonic arcade games working on the Steam Deck with the MAME emulator. Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car, Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop, Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter, and even the unreleased Sega Sonic Bros. But Sega Sonic the Hedgehog might be the coolest game I got working because I got it to control almost exactly as intended. For those of you that don't know, I live close enough to the famous Galloping Ghost arcade to go there every once in a while and play this game on an actual arcade cabinet. And if you've ever played this game, or at least seen someone play this game, you'll know that you control Sonic with a trackball. It's super janky, but in my opinion, replicating these controls is essential to the experience. And I actually managed to get this game working with the Steam Deck's trackpad, which behaves extremely similar to the trackball. Especially with the haptic feedback, it feels absolutely amazing to play. In fact, I think it controls even better than the oversensitive arcade trackballs. All you have to do to get these controls working is go into the MAME emulator settings and set the trackball to be controlled by your mouse. Then in the Steam controller settings, enable the right trackpad as your mouse and set the jump button to the L bumper, since our right hand is going to be occupied with the trackpad. And for the mouse sensitivity, I found that setting it to a value of 20 was the perfect sweet spot. Please do yourself a favor and set this game up if you can, it's super worth the trouble. Also, fun fact, the voice actor for Sonic in all of these arcade games voices Trunks in the Japanese version of Dragon Ball Z.
父さんは間違っている。あいつを完全体にしてはいけないんだ。
Another amazing parallel between Sonic and Dragon Ball Z that I totally could have made in my old video talking about exactly that. Anyways, the next two systems we'll be going over are the Master System and the Game Gear. We'll be using RetroArch for these two as well. Both systems have a lot of overlap in their Sonic libraries. Despite this, I decided to get both versions of each game since there are ever so slight differences. This includes Sonic 1 and 2, Sonic Chaos, Mean Bean Machine, Spinball, and Sonic Blast. But the Game Gear has some exclusives that you won't find on the Master System, so of course I grabbed those as well. Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic Drift 1 and 2, Sonic Labyrinth, Tails Sky Patrol, and Tails Adventure. And yeah, everything worked fantastically as they tend to do with these older games. Next, I picked up the 3 Sonic games that can be found on the Sega Saturn, playable via RetroArch once again. Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic Jam, and Sonic R. Everything plays great, but the only issue is that Sonic 3D Blast has no music. The solution to this is combining the Q and bin files into one CHD file. Again, Google is your friend, so if you want to do that, look up how to combine bin and Q files into CHD files. Alright, let's do another meme game. Sonic Jam on the Gamecom might actually be one of the worst Sonic games out there. I'm serious, Sonic 06 looks like a masterpiece compared to it. This is another game that runs on MAME, and let me tell you, it runs like complete ass. But the main point is that we got it on here and it works, and that's all that matters. Trust me, I got this simply as a proof of concept. I will not be playing through this on my own time. Oh well, so let's move on to the 3 Sonic games on the Dreamcast by using RetroArch again. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, along with Sonic Shuffle, all work great. The Dreamcast versions of Adventure 1 and 2 are actually what I grew up with, so playing these as opposed to the DX and Battle versions is always a fun nostalgia trip for me. I definitely recommend getting and modding the Steam versions of these games though, because Adventure 1 on the Dreamcast is locked at 30 frames per second and it really throws me off. Oh yeah, and Sonic Shuffle is Sonic Shuffle. But at least the emulator lets us use cheats. Come on, the CPUs basically cheat themselves, we're just fighting fire with fire. Here's a cute little gem I got working on the Neo Geo Pocket Color called Sonic Pocket Adventure that we got running through RetroArch. Seriously, this game is so charming, like just look at it. It's super easy to set up and runs great. I'd recommend you give it a try. This next system is where I personally spent my entire childhood living and breathing Sonic games, the Nintendo GameCube. For these games, we'll be using the emulator called Dolphin. There's Sonic Adventure DX and 2 Battle, Heroes, Mega Collection, Gems Collection, Riders, and of course, Shadow the Hedgehog. You might get the occasional frame drop here and there depending on the game, but each one is playable in a fantastic state. But man, finally, a way to play Shadow the Hedgehog on the go. I personally think that this is where we as a human race have peaked, so it doesn't really get much better than this. The Game Boy Advance is also home to a ton of amazing Sonic games, and again, we can play them using RetroArch. Yeah, RetroArch is kind of an absolute unit if you haven't already noticed. Anyways, there's the Sonic Advance Trilogy, Battle, Pinball Party, and yes, I even made sure to get Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis. Forget Sonic 06, I think this game is legitimately the worst product Sonic Team has ever put out. Luckily, we were able to get most of the 6th generation console Sonic games on the GameCube. Compared to the PS2, each one plays much better over there. But there's a couple of Sonic games that weren't on the GameCube, so the PS2 will have to do. We'll be using the emulator PCSX2, and the 2 games we'll be playing here are Sonic Mega Collection Plus and Sega Superstars Tennis. Mega Collection Plus has new menus, additional artwork in the gallery, and a few extra games. So I figured I'd include this as it's different enough from the regular version. The Nintendo DS has a pretty stacked library of Sonic games playable with RetroArch. And with the Steam Deck's touchscreen, these games are all going to function as intended. We've got Sonic Rush and Rush Adventure, Sonic Colors DS, Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing, and Sega Superstars Tennis. Yes, there's another version of Superstars Tennis, but this one is sort of a handheld demake, and there's actually even one more version of this game later on that we'll be talking about. I will say though that the DS emulator was surprisingly choppy with some of these games, but nothing was unplayable in my opinion. Anyways, the PSP had 2 Sonic titles, Sonic Rivals 1 and 2, that we can play using the emulator PPSSPP. I'm not the biggest fan of these games, but maybe I'll change my mind now that I can easily play them and with great performance no less. The Wii was another pretty big console for Sonic games. For these games, we'll once again be using the Dolphin emulator. With this, we can play Sonic and the Secret Rings, Black Knight, Zero Gravity, Unleashed, and Colors. You'll need to really tinker with the controls for Secret Rings and Black Knight to get working with a regular control scheme, since they both heavily rely on motion controls. For me, I googled for control schemes other people set up for these games, and they worked great. Either that, or you can maybe set up the control scheme with the Steam Deck's gyro controls. Just be careful and don't end up chucking the system across the entire room. Another possible option, and I haven't tested this out, is pairing an actual Wiimote and playing it the way God intended. This next console, the PS3, is where things get a bit tricky. But PS3 emulation has come a long way recently, and these games play better than you'd think. Just worse than you'd hope. We'll be using the emulator RPCS3. Sonic 06 is straight up broken as the graphics don't display properly. Total bummer, but I have another way that we can play this that I'll be showing off later. Sonic Unleashed actually runs surprisingly well, all things considered. The frame rate will hang out anywhere between 15 to 40 frames a second, which honestly is about on par with the actual console. We also have the final version of Sega Superstars Tennis I felt was different enough compared to the others and worth getting. And it's on the PS3 that I opted to get Sonic the Fighters. You may have noticed that it was missing from my arcade games section, but I'd say that this is the definitive version of the game worth getting. The PSN version lets us actually set up online play. Pretty cool. Just like the DS, the 3DS is another great handheld to emulate on the Steam Deck because we can utilize the touchscreen and essentially play these games as intended. We'll be using an emulator called Citra. On here, we can play Sonic Generations, All-Stars Racing Transformed, Lost World 3DS, Boom Shattered Crystal, and Boom Fire and Ice. I don't have much experience using 3DS emulators, so I was surprised at how not so great some of these games ran. All-Stars Racing Transformed was so laggy it was basically unplayable, but everything else was decent-ish with somewhat frequent lag spikes. But hey, now I can finally try out the 3DS versions of Generations and Lost World because I've actually never played them. The last game and console we'll be emulating is the Wii U on the emulator Cemu. And the game we'll be emulating is none other than Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. This game is capped at 30 frames per second, but I'm sure there's a cheat out there that can uncap it to 60 if you look hard enough. I haven't tried this because honestly, I don't really have any plans on playing through this game, but it runs pretty dang stable at 30 frames per second from what I've played. And that is everything we can emulate. But while we're finished with all the games we can emulate, we're not quite finished with Sonic games. Official games maybe, but if you're a die-hard Sonic fan such as myself, you'll know that the fan game scene is pretty poppin'. These were all super easy to set up, and a few of these games actually have native Linux versions, which you can simply just install. But for everything else running on Windows, all you have to do is add them to your Steam library as a non-Steam game, and force launch with Proton Experimental. I was able to get Sonic GT, Utopia, Triple Trouble 16-bit, Roboblast 2, and Roboblast 2 Kart. I also managed to get the Sonic 1 and 2 decompilations, which are native fan-made ports of the Christian Whitehead versions of Sonic 1 and 2 with the ability to easily mod. And I even picked up Sonic 3 Air, a fan-made remaster of Sonic 3, which honestly is better than the one that we have in Origins. Oh yeah, and remember how I said that we'd still have a way to play Sonic 06 on the Steam Deck? Well, we can mostly do so using the fan game Sonic Project 06. This is kind of just the best way to play Sonic 06 anyways, since there are just so many improvements and quality of life updates that were added from the original. At the time of this video, only Sonic and Shadows levels are playable, but eventually Silver's entire campaign should be added as well. While all of the other fan games run great, Project 06 runs a bit choppy, but it also does on my super powerful PC, so it's something that I was prepared for. Just turn the graphics to a lower setting and it should make things a little bit smoother. Okay, so I'm probably going to get a bunch of comments about this later on because I'm making this video like 2 weeks before Sonic Frontiers comes out, so obviously I haven't been able to test it yet. But if the recent Yakuza games are anything to go by, which were also published by Sega and had great compatibility on the Steam Deck, as well as Sonic Origins having great compatibility, hopefully Sonic Frontiers will have full compatibility right out of the gate. Fingers crossed. So for all the Sonic games I was able to get running, there's a few that I couldn't that I gotta mention. 2 of them obviously are going to be the games that utilize the PS2 iToy and the Xbox Kinect. Actually, PCSX2 has iToy support, I just don't have an iToy to test it out. So technically, Sega Superstars might be a game you can get running for yourself if you have the hardware. There's also, of course, Sonic Freeriders on the Kinect. As far as I know, the Xbox 360 emulator Xenia does not have Kinect support. And even if it did, I don't have one, so I wouldn't be able to play it anyways. It's fine though, because Free Riders is a figment of our imaginations and doesn't exist. Crazy that they only made 2 Sonic Riders games. They should really make a 3rd one. We can go even deeper and start including really obscure games in this list of games I couldn't get, which I feel like I should do since I included really obscure games in the list of games I did get. If so, I'd have to include all of the iOS games like the Sonic Jump series, Dash series, Runner series, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Forces Speed Battle. So far, there's no way to emulate iOS or Android that I could find. But we can even go a step deeper and also include some of the Sega Cafe games and Nokia phone games, since I have no idea how you'd even emulate them, let alone get the game files for some of these. There's also a Leapster Sonic X game, a Sonic game on the Leapfrog Didj, I have no idea how to pronounce that, and a series of Sonic games on Java. This list probably goes on and on. It all depends on how deep you want to go and what technically constitutes as a Sonic game in your mind. So, can the Steam Deck play every Sonic game? No, not all of them, but it can play most of them. There's at least some way to play each of the mainline games, and for your average Sonic fan, that's probably going to be enough. But even if you're as far down the rabbit hole as I am, there's a way to play almost all of the spin-offs as well as most of the extremely obscure games. I'm absolutely loving my Steam Deck, and I hope I've convinced you that this might be the best place for Sonic games. Anyways, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, leave a fat like and subscribe for more content similar to this. In the comments below, let me know what you think about the Steam Deck. Do you have one? And if you don't, are you planning on getting one now? And finally, thank you so much to my channel members for supporting the channel. And with all that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Peace.